Bona tarda a tothom.
Good afternoon to you all, or good morning, depending where you are, of course. Welcome to this session that is aimed at shedding light on Esteban Muruetagoiena's case.
Joining us today, I am very honored to co-host this event from the European Parliament. I take it as my modest way to support Tamara in her search for the truth about what happened to her father, Esteban Muruetagoiena. Thank you very much, Tamara, for giving me the opportunity to add my voice to yours in this endeavor. I'm also very happy that Jonathan Martinez has joined us, since it was his journalistic work that brought this case to my attention. And of course, it is a great honor to have Dr. Paco Etxebarría with us, as we all admire his commitment to uncover the truth. The first time you hear about the Muruetagoiena case, you start feeling something in between disbelief and outrage. A young doctor so unfairly and senselessly killed. The impossibility to get any kind of justice of reparation for such a violent case. And then the way he has been forgotten for so many years, forcing his daughter to fight for something, the search for the truth of what happened to her father while detained by the police, which this should be a matter of just, a routine investigation in any democratic country. Unfortunately, the search for the truth in police custody, the search for the truth of torture in Spain is and has been an uphill battle against impunity. Through the tireless work of civil society and the research of people like Etxebarría, we do have a notion of the extent and pervasiveness of the practice, but the harsh reality is that the responsible parties have seldom brought to justice. Spain has been condemned by the European Court of Human Rights on 11 occasions for its failing to investigate allegations of torture. In 7 of these cases, the current Minister of the Interior, Fernando Grande Marlaska, was the investigation judge. This is why Tamara's fight is so important. It reminds us all, politicians, journalists, civil society, that this is an ongoing battle and that we need to keep fighting and pushing to get justice for the victims of Polish torture in Spain, even if it is one victim at a time. So thank you very much, Tamara, for your courage and for being with us today. And I now give the floor to Tamara. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clara, for the opening words. And, I always say this is an honor for me, when I give a presentation. But this event is different. This is really special to me. This is an event in the European Parliament, and that's where I started my professional career. In 1999, I worked there for 5 years. I worked for the Greens. And I always admire that institution, and never in my wildest dreams did I think that I will ever be able to bring my father's case there. Also, today, with me, there are going to be Paco and Jonathan, who are people who I absolutely admire and who have done a tremendous job to bring light to this case. And so today, I'm joining all of you from Connecticut. I am the executive director of Great Mountain Forest, a forest associated with Yale University. And I'm about to tell a story. This story starts in 1978 in the town of Oyarzun in the Basque Country, between member states, France and Spain, right at the border. So I would describe our life there as pretty bucolic. But then one day, our life changed forever. My father was the local doctor. And one night, a group of ETA, attacked a Spanish military police department. There were shotguns and there were people wounded. Some of the ETA members were wounded and escaped. They were fleeing to France. But they were so heavily wounded that they needed a doctor right away. And they came to my father's house, to our home. My father was not at home. I was with my mom by myself. It was late at night and they showed up. My mom, in panic, called a friend doctor because my father wasn't there yet. He was at the movie theater. And then my father arrived. They took care of the wounded people. They saved their lives. And I suppose the original plan was to flee right away. You know, the ETA members will flee right away. But it snowed and they couldn't cross the border. So they have to stay in our home for 17 days. My mother and I were hostages. My father was able to go to work every day. And you would say, well, I was only 4. How do I remember all of this? You know, when your room is being taken over by men with shotguns and full in blood, it's not easy to forget. So they fled and they told my parents not to tell anyone. They didn't, but someone found out and my father was called to go to trial. He went to trial and he was able to prove his innocence. And so we thought that episode had passed and we could move on. But my parents' life was not the same. They were not the same. They suffered a great deal after that incident. And they finally separated. And my mother started a new life with her husband in Madrid. I'm telling all of this because I moved with her. And that's one night, 3 years later, so 3 years later, in the middle of the night, my father was taken by the Spanish military police under the anti-terrorist law, which meant 10 days incommunicado. You would say, what is incommunicado? Incommunicado means no access to the outside world when you're arrested, no lawyer during that time. At the same time, I was in Madrid with my mother, again at night, alone with her. A few men came to our home. There were Spanish military police, not in uniforms, and they were arresting my mother. I have very vivid moments of that night. It was horrific. They took her and they put her on a cell next to my father's. That's how we found out he was arrested. In that cell next to him, she was able to hear how he screamed as they were torturing him. A few days later, my mom was released with no charges. Almost 10 days after my father's arrest, he was also released with no charges. But my father was not the same. He could barely make any sense. He was not a human being anymore. He made no connections mentally with anybody. He called my mother right away and said, "Where is Tamara? I want to see her." Because they had told her and him that they were going to rape me. None of that happened. But it was part of the psychological torture he endured. And then he went home, and 3 days passed, and I never was able to join him because he never woke up. He died at the age of 38. And the time his lawyers called Amnesty International, and there was a political turmoil at the time. There were demonstrations. And through the pressure of different civil organizations, lawyers, and people close to my father, they called for an autopsy. The governor of the state of Gipuzkoa called a doctor to perform the autopsy. Then, thank goodness, he was not alone performing the autopsy. There were other witnesses. One of them was my father's uncle, Dr. Scola, who was also a doctor. And he was able to witness a man, a doctor, who performed what we would call an autopsy, a man who was not trained in forensic medicine. He had never performed an autopsy, yet he didn't have the skills, the tools, or the knowledge to do what he was supposed to do. Through Amnesty International, there were a few doctors who were able to observe the documents of the autopsy, and they claimed that that was not what would be considered in medicine an autopsy. But the official record said that my father died of a heart attack. So that was it. That was the end of the story. No justice, no possibility to go to court, nothing. And I didn't speak about it for a long time. I kept in silence for very long. Only 15 years ago, almost when it was his 25th anniversary, through the support of people and civil organizations, I was able to find my voice in being able to talk about my father's case. But I always felt paralyzed because I was told that there was nothing I could do. There was no legal course. Statute of limitations had passed, and nothing. I heard it over and over again. You can't do anything, or worse, you shouldn't do anything. But that didn't fit with me. That's not who I am. I am a scientist, and I know that in science, all you need to move forward is data. But I didn't know how and what did I need. And that's where Paco Etxebarria's work and with his team start shedding light into the case and give me the knowledge that I needed. They have helped me very much in this process, but I needed more information. And this is where Jonathan Martinez comes into the scene with more information, with also incredible research onto what happened then. So I had good amount of information then, but I was missing one thing. And that is that I needed to know if I had the social support to bring this forward. So there were a series of articles about me and my father's case. And I received an unprecedented tsunami of support. And I realized that society was not only ready, it was really hungry for stories like this and for bringing this forward. And I thought, this is it. This is when I'm doing it. And so here I am today, speaking to all of you. I want to thank very much Clara Ponsatí and Pernando Barrena for their leadership in this matter and their support. I also want to thank Paco and Jonathan because I admire you and love you more than words can say. You have a very special place in my heart. To all the people in the audience out there, through YouTube, through Twitter, at home, on their phones, wherever you are, through their clicks and retweets and likes and calls and texts and this and that. Most of you never met my father, but you're there because you care. And that means everything to me. And thank you so much to the interpreters today for doing a great job and also for listening. Thank you very much. I'm forever grateful.
Bueno, eskerrik asko, Tamara. Ha sido una intervención.
Thank you very, very much, Tamara. It's been a very moving introduction. Looking at the past is always painful in these circumstances, but it also enables us to be able to look at the future with some hope. And I honestly believe that these two visions of things and approaches of things are very important. Every time I've heard you, I believe you've made me think that you're very generous, and this is a value that makes you even greater. Our next guest is Jonathan Martínez. He's a journalist and researcher in audiovisual communication and a regular in a number of different media. I must say that his publication last March in the Gara newspaper of the article, The Daughter of Dr. Muruetagoiena, has triggered this webinar. His story prompted many people to think that the case of Esteban Muruetagoiena was still too unknown and that more had to be done, that it was not too late at all. Jonathan is going to tell us why he decided to pull this thread and write about this topic. And he's going to tell us what caught his attention about this very particular case. Jonathan, the floor is all yours. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I could spend all my time thanking, first of all of you, all the organizers. I would like to thank Paco Etxebarría for his work. And of course, thanks to Tamara for this wonderful bond we have developed over time. But let me go straight to the point because time is limited. Let me start by remembering and reminding of Gabriel García Márquez's novel, The Colonel Has No One to Write to Him, where the main character waits day after day for a letter to get a pension. And then 39 years elapsed since Esteban Muruetagoiena disappeared. Well, since he was made to disappear, as people in Latin America would say. In this research, I realized that he was my age, the age I am now when he died. Dr. Muruetagoiena, I believe, had no one to write him a letter. He had no one to write about his case, about what happened during those 9 days where he disappeared from the surface of the earth. Up until recently, his story was like a chaos, made up of fragments and contradictory testimonies. But it was Tamara Muruetagoiena, his daughter, who had it very clear in her mind that there was not just a great story behind all this, but that this story needed to be told because it was still just partially known. I believe that we shouldn't just resign yourself to just becoming a statistic or a piece of data. So I would like to thank Francisco Etxebarría, who's certified more than 4,000 cases of torture, and the Foundation Euskal Memoria has certified more than 10,000 cases and reports of torture. In some cases, of course, the testimonies have already been lost or are even contradictory. But yet behind each case, each number, each file, there is a story, and behind each individual, there's probably a whole of events that we need to order, to sort out, and that's our task. We need to write about it. We're not neutral before all this. When Tamara asked me if I could write her father's story, we had some intuition, but no certainty at all. We didn't know what happened, what had happened, what was there still to be told. And I accepted the challenge because I thought it would be an easy task, and that maybe it would be enough to, just come up with some additional data and summarize it in an article. And suddenly I realized this was not the case. I would like to thank the people from NICE who allowed me to tell this story in 2 publications, in 2 articles and chronicles that represented the 2 stages of the story, what happened up until Esteban Muruetagoiena passed, and then what happened later when we start to get more and more testimonies that terrifying autopsy that was carried out, the massive social protest that seems to have been forgotten, because at the time, of course, there was this feeling, this rage in the people, that feeling that information was being hidden by people. This process was quite similar to a detective novel, a detective story where there is a murder. We had some testimonies and we had to investigate and look into all of this. And the problem is that, you know, testimonies were contradictory sometimes, or were quite weak because a long time has elapsed, or in Tamara's case, because there was a long period of imposed silence due to her pain that is related to the whole process. I want to, of course, recognize Tamara's work and her mom's work as well, Elizabeth's work, who's been forgotten for 40 years of institutional silence. There was a moment, an absurd moment of the investigation where I see myself reviewing articles, looking for weather forecast in 1982 to see if the testimonies about the weather were correct or not, and match what the newspapers tell us. Or I surprised myself looking at the cinema theater to check what film was being projected in San Sebastian to actually realize if that matches the testimonies we had. So there's a huge gap in the investigation here. And I would like to mention here something that has been very much discussed. We now speak about memory, about a struggle for the real narrative, the narrative of what actually happened. I don't like that at all. I do believe there is an official narrative that has been powerful ones over the past 40 years. Small initiatives from associations and institutions that are trying to add nuances to that official narrative that has been imposed on us over the past 40 years. And I think that Esteban Muruetagoiena's case is a paradigm. It's a person that's not been recognized as a victim by the Spanish government. And it's about time we speak about not recognized victims. Even when we speak about a case like Esteban Muruetagoiena's, we also speak about the other victims. We do talk about them as others, as if they were less important, or maybe tier 2 victims. So I believe we need to dignify these individuals and their struggle. They are equal to other victims of political violence. Anyone that is suffering is equal to the rest, regardless of where they've been born, or regardless of their political ideologies. I think that we're little by little moving forward towards the recognition of Esteban Muruetagoiena's case, thanks to Francisco Etxebarría and Tamara Muruetagoiena. The Basque government has passed an initiative in the Basque Parliament. And I would like to make a point here. This recognition will come labeled as victims of police forces abuse. We still have victims of terrorism and other types of victims that are labeled in a different way. And they seem to be minor victims here. So I've got this feeling that we've got two types of victims. We've got victims of political violence here. And it's a euphemism, you know. So in this window of opportunity that we now have, I believe we can start to build shared memories that don't support the unilateral vision of what's been told in the past 40 years. Because I do believe that this mature society is worth of the truth. And I believe that people that have suffered any type of violence are entitled to being treated equally. I believe that story can be told in many different ways. Tamara told us her story, the summary of her story. We've been looking into it over the past months together, and in spite of the obstacles and hurdles and difficulties, we have this satisfaction knowing that Esteban Muruetagoiena does have someone to write about him and does have someone that is eager and willing to listen to his story. There are people that are willing to investigate, to keep looking into all this and getting and collecting more data to explain this reality, this general phenomenon of torture that went on. And I believe that is the best possible reward for people like Tamara or her mother, Elizabeth, that have been looking for the truth for such a long time. If they don't have institutional recognition and truth, well, at least we will have the truth that is out there. We want people to know about the truth of what happened. Thank you very much. Thanks very much, Jonathan. As I was hearing and listening to you, you made me think of this story and how important the human factor is. You remind me of Graham Greene's novel, which John Carlin so masterfully reflects in the work that analyzes Mandela's personality as a catalyst for political change in South Africa. That human factor is the engine of life, and it requires the truth. It is the engine of life, but it is also the engine of death, paradoxically. So I think that this is a good point for me to introduce you to Paco Etxebarría, who's a specialist doctor in legal and forensic medicine, professor at the Basque Public University, and a member of the Aranzadi Science Society. Paco is a very well-known professional. I will just mention some of his numerous forensic studies as a judicial expert in numerous torture processes, as in the Lhasa Tabala case, exhumation of graves of people murdered during the 1936 Spanish War and the Franco regime, also in the exhumation of missing individuals in Western Sahara. He participated in the exhumation of Victor Jara and Salvador and Paco Etxebarría thus contributes here with his vision as a colleague of Esteban Muruetagoiena and also as a forensic expert. You have the floor, Paco. Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right? Well, I'm going to be sharing my screen now so that we can all see the same thing. If you can help me with that. Can you enable me so that I can share my screen with all of you? Thank you. I don't have the possibility of sharing my screen, so if the host could enable me, I would really appreciate it. All right. It seems to be working now. I believe you can all see my screen now. Well, let's start from the beginning. Greetings from me to you all. Good afternoon. Many years ago, I read that Amnesty International said that when we speak about torture, humanity is divided 50% between those who can't believe it and those who don't want to believe it. We don't have room in between for people that can have a different position, because this is so extraordinary that for many it's unthinkable. And precisely when Esteban was detained, I was finishing my studies more or less at the same time, and I need to confess that this had a great impact for doctors in Gipuzkoa, those who belong to Esteban's generation and those of us who were younger. It's already been said that Esteban Muruetagoiena was a doctor. He was 36 and he died in 1982 in the town of Oyarzun, where he worked. The health center is now bearing his name, but on that plate you see there was also a violent abuse that was completely unnecessary. Sorry. So the people in this town remember him, cannot forget him, because his death had a great impact on all of them. I believe Tamara has already told you about his story. Let me just give you some context concerning our investigation. In a publication talking about torture, many things are explained about his case. He was incommunicado, detained for 9 days. So all type of abuse and ill treatment and torture could have happened there, because these 9 days of incommunicado detention enabled the police forces to carry out any activity they would like. So it was a terrible situation that happened to thousands of people. Since 1960 to the current date, we know that in the Basque Country, about 20,000 people were arrested. Out of them, there's a whole list that we have drafted over time, and because we've been asking these people and their relatives how they experienced their detentions. Esteban is one more. He was arrested together with another doctor, Dr. Getano, to whom we can ask about this, because Dr. Getano was still alive, and therefore there was this possibility to ask him about what happened. After Esteban's death, an autopsy was carried out. This is part of the autopsy report that makes me feel outraged. It was carried out by a physician that had no forensic training at all. International observers here tend to say that the research in torture is insufficient, and clearly this is the case, but not just the legal or judicial investigation, but also the forensic one, because this report states that there wasn't any autopsy at all. Dr. Afageme opened the thorax, looked at the heart, found something in there, and automatically said, okay, there is a lesion in the heart, so the cause of the death would be a heart attack. Well, I doubt that. There are only 2 pages in this autopsy report, no pictures at all, and no complementary or additional study. It's the report of a non-autopsy, in fact. And it surprises me that it states that Esteban presented hematic fluid in the left atrial pavilion, probably due to an orthorrhagia whose cause cannot be specified. But the doctor estimates that due to the appearance it presents, it must have taken place in the previous 48 hours, and yet nobody looked into his skull. And it may be someone, there may be someone that's covering up for something here. We have a doctor from Copenhagen, a forensic doctor, and a forensic doctor from Lyon came to the Basque Country. They couldn't carry out a second autopsy, but they had a conversation with Dr. Alfageme. And before very basic medical questions, Dr. Alfageme couldn't provide any answers and said some very simple things that prove that the legal investigation based on the autopsy is completely useless. It's not even believable. And we find things like this one, for instance, where someone asked Dr. Alfa Jaime, did you cut the heart? No. I told myself, well, shall I or not? I believe that, well, this is the death of a colleague and that it would be most appropriate as a Christian man that I am not to go or not to carry out any further proceedings. Oh, this is outrageous, if you ask me. And there's more like this, of course. So years went by, and fortunately there was an initiative started by the Basque government back in July 2015, the municipal portraits of violations of the right to life in the Basque case. And here we find Esteban Muruetagoiena's case, where it is stated that he suffered torture. And a number of different physicians signed this report. At the time, there was a movement of Basque physicians against torture. Let's not forget that a year before, an individual had died, Joseba Arregui, while he was arrested, and there was a sentence proving that he had suffered torture. This is the context, right, of the time. Look at this, between 1978 and 1985, as you can see here, more people died. I mentioned Joseba Arregui, who died in 81, Jose Arregui, as you can see there, but there are more individuals here on this list. So up until 1985, you've got all these people that died due to torture. And let me show you this fundamental image to explain our investigation. Well, there is an official research concerning ETA's attacks. We know how many people ETA wounded. We also know how many deaths were caused by police forces. They were actually police forces. We know how many people died in strange circumstances. We know how many people were wounded, how many people were tortured by the security forces. But at the top of this image, you see that we've got precise data. But if you look at the bottom part of this chart, we've got many questions, and this gray area is totally unknown. We've got no official data about it. So we've got official research at the top, but we lack data at the bottom of this chart. And this is why the Basque government started a plan and drafted a plan for peaceful coexistence of the Basque government. And in its article or point number 6 on investigation and action on torture, it states that all the cases should be looked into. The last report on torture was filed in 2014. This research project on torture and ill treatment in the Basque Country between 1960 and 2014 was carried out by a group of people. I've had the chance to participate. We carried out a census with supporting documentation that enabled us to establish the basis and the ground and the foundations to evaluate its scope and dimension. Between 1960 and 84, 13 people were hospitalized after staying at a police station. 5 people died in a police station. More than 5,000 people were tortured. In this report that was published by the Basque government, you will find a great deal of information, and you may find that 90 convictions were carried out affecting 31 people. So according to international observers, we realize that torture in the Basque Country was more than sporadic. This is something that has been admitted by the authorities. It's been said by international observers, legal professionals, a number of different associations, victims, political parties. Torture in the Basque Country has been more than sporadic. When we started this research project, we said, what does this mean? What is this strange sentence all about? What is more than sporadic? Is there in between nothing and lots? Where shall we place this more than sporadic torture? This is one of the reasons why the Basque government commissioned this research study that we carried out, and where we took into consideration a number of different elements like documents, testimonies, and experts' reports. I myself have collected more than 500 testimonies that are recorded on a video format. And we also had some other reports that were published back in 2008. And in 2012, a decree was passed by the Basque Parliament that started a commission or an assessment that was published. It was the Assessment Commission, Victims of Human Rights Violations and Other Unjust Suffering Produced in a Context of Politically Motivated Violence in the Basque Country between 1960 and 1978. Out of more than 200 cases recognized by this commission, and this is official, right? This has an official recognition. Out of them, 72 are related to torture. This research covered up until 1978. What have we done with all this information between 1960 and 2014? Well, we've made up this graph you see here. And some people say, oh, it's impossible. There must be some mistake there. Well, of course there are mistakes, because we just covered 4,113 cases, but since this report was filed up until now, we've got 500 more cases, and in Navarre we've got 1,000 more. And maybe in the future we'll be able to correct and update this graph, this chart. 4,113 cases, out of which more than 2,000 had been ratified by people that have said, yes, this is my case. I admit, I allow you to record my video, my audio. We've got that material. And if this wasn't enough, we also carried out a research with psychologists, and we applied 202 Istanbul protocols. Nowhere else in the world have we applied Istanbul protocol to a group of people of cases of more than 200 cases. Well, in the left here you see 1960, and up until 1974, we've got 72 recognized cases of torture. But then came democracy to Spain, and there are 20 sentences by the Supreme Court. The last one was issued in 2008. And look at between 1979 and 1984. Later, the methodology changed, but the victims that have been recognized amount to 31 individuals, 4 women and 27 men. 49 people were sentenced, 49 police officers, a woman and 48 men. And then I don't have time to tell you what happened between 2002 and 2011, but here the European Court of Human Rights said that there are cases that filed torture reports that were not looked into. So let me end my presentation with this graph. 26% of the examples we've got date from the dictatorship, and then 73% date from democracy already. Going back to a dictatorship may be difficult, but it's easier to look at the rest of the cases. So we've got a high number of people that were tortured under Franco's regime. And in those cases, of course, a great deal of material in paper were destroyed. What did we find in 1983? Well, even the Ministry of Interior acknowledged that there had been ill treatment, but no torture. Well, it's something surprising anyway. I feel bothered by this because from my perspective, from a perspective of a doctor or a psychologist, there aren't any difference in severity of torture. How can you make a difference there if this was humiliating or it was degrading treatment or anything else? Well, this is all related to legal rules and regulations. Well, it's all right, but we don't want to make a difference between a woman, for instance, that suffered ill treatment, telling you that when she has her menstruation, she was laughed at and couldn't clean herself. We're not going to say that that is not severe torture, because the person affected by this seems or could feel that this is as severe as other type of torture. So these different levels of severity for doctors and for psychologists, of course, need to be ignored. Is this severe or not? Look at this. Look at this. This picture you see on the right-hand side is a picture taken of this person when he came to prison, and it was said that he himself had inflicted that on himself. And there are many other cases like this one. The Basque Parliament, with its legitimacy, deliberated for over and over and over again in the different terms of office. The Basque Parliament has discussed about this in many occasions. I don't know if this is the case in other parliaments in Europe. Did they have to think or talk about torture? And the latest reflection dates back to 2016. And in this case, the Basque Parliament urges the public powers to commit to purify with all rigor and diligence the actions of public servants in this area, and to the judges and prosecutors to be especially active. This is not an association in a town saying this. It's the Basque Parliament, and they are right. Of course, we do have information in the media. Judges accuse and say that in the Basque Country there is torture. There are a number of different judges in San Sebastian that claim this, and in 2016 some people, members of the association Jueces por la Democracia, state that we judges leave a lot to be desired in the investigation and prevention of torture. The Basque Ombudsman says the same and demands that torture is eradicated from the exercise of power. So we're today talking about Esteban's case. If we go back to 1982, what can be done? Well, look at that little square there. That will be the new period that's going to be looked into by the Basque government, not having in hand the 2012 decree, but rather with the law that was passed in 2016. And in this period of time, we've got a number of different cases, but there are people that feel exhausted, that don't trust the system. And this is where we place Esteban's case. It was Tamara who struggled and who fought for this case to be known by the Commission. So if we look at the different testimonies we have, the Commission, where we have psychologists, forensic doctors, and a number of different legal experts, I would say that now in the Commission, Esteban's case is going to be recognized as a case of torture, clearly. So I am optimist myself. I know this is no solace for Tamara and her family. And in any case, I would say that at least they would have an official recognition. That is something they've never had in the past. I haven't included in this chart that in 1981, sorry, 1993, the Lassa and Zabala case occurred. And some people say, well, there are some cases here and there. Well, this is not true. If you add all these cases, we can fill in the whole of this timeline between 1960 and 1984. In 1982, we've caught 50 cases of people in the Basque Autonomous Community, not including Navarre, that were tortured. And we don't have all of them here, of course. I'm sure that there are more and more cases. As we look into them, we find more and more cases. Because some people were frightened some years ago, but they are not frightened anymore. Let's not forget that people reporting torture were prosecuted and abused because of that by the police forces, of course. Some people or a forensic doctor was attacked with a bomb because he was trying to prove forensically that some of the cases were indeed torture cases. Well, and this is all from me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias por tu presentación, Paco.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation, Paco, and thanks for your rigor. Well, if you agree, we can now go to questions from the floor. We have time for questions, and I see there are some of them there. The first one would be for Tamara. In your presentation, you mentioned that the crimes committed in your father's case are legally prescribed. To you, what's more important, that the people that are guilty of torture are punished, or that the truth is recognized publicly? Well, I'm not looking for punishment. And I wouldn't like anyone to be punished in the name of my father, but in the existing legislation, you know, if someone makes a crime or commits a murder, they have to spend some time in prison. That's what usually happens, right? If this is so, if these individuals that committed a crime against my father went to prison, well, it would be good that the legal mechanisms could be implemented here. I very much doubt so, but what I want is everything. I don't like the term punishment, but I would like the legal process to go on, and I would also like to have some recognition, of course. And I'm going to knock on every doors I have to knock on. I will go to all the institutions I need to go to achieve truth, justice, and reparation, because that's what I deserve. Thank you very much, Tamara. And the next question would be for Jonathan. In the framework of truth, justice, and reparation, what should be the reaction and the response of the state before this case of torture? In 1 minute, if you can, very briefly. We're doing badly for time. Well, there's a very well-known case, that is the Maria case. Finally, we've got some institutional recognition from the Andalusian parliament, and nevertheless, at the Spanish state, people would say that these didn't match the necessary conditions in order to be recognized as a victim of torture. In this case, and the case of many other people that suffered torture, well, I believe that they should be recognized by the Spanish government, which is the one that needs to respond for these 40 years of activities. Thank you very much, Jonathan. There's a third question, I believe, in this case for Paco. In your research, do you take into consideration the difficulty to submit evidence in cases of torture? Well, of course, we do have difficulties, yes. There is full impunity there. It's a hidden it's hidden murders that have occurred there. And so the evidence are never as rigorous as the ones that are required by a court. But if you're before a person that's been in a police station and he or she or they are telling you what they've been through, and for instance, they've been beaten in the first day, but that they had an ointment for the bruises to go away. Well, that can be true or not, but we measure the level of credibility that that testimony can have, right? So I know enough in this matter because I've also worked in cases of gender violence. But you know that what's not seen is much more than what's seen. I mean, when a woman says, I was beaten before my children, that is probably true. And she probably is hiding some of the things because it's very hard for her to tell about that. And in many languages, there aren't even words to explain the level of suffering you've got. People like Yona Reche, who wrote a book, or Menchaca, who explains his case in a book, not in a piece of paper, in a whole book. They try, they look for words to be convincing, to really transmit what they have to say. And to this testimony, we also add the evidence following the Istanbul Protocol. And we draw a very clear conclusion from all of this, and it is that people are credible. They're telling the truth, and they do not exaggerate, because that little thing that has happened to them seems to be huge to them. And this could be a difficulty, and I understand that. Well, people may not understand it, but this is so all over the world. Research on torture is facing this hurdle over and over again. We don't see people with their clothes in blood. As you know, in the Basque Country, I don't want to show you people with their with a broken nose. I don't want to show you that. I don't want to show you people with the soles of their feet bleeding. We're not going to see that anymore. I mean, after Miguel Zabalza's death, a matter that needs to be clarified as well, the use of the bathtub in torture goes down, and there are more and more people with a plastic bag on their heads, because they've realized that they were killing people. The number of people that have fainted is huge. When you ask people, did you faint? Well, yes. The answer is usually yes. And they have in many cases been very close to death. And in Esteban's case, there's something very interesting, you know, that the people who went to Madrid to pick him up said that he was hallucinating. Esteban was not a mentally ill individual, but he suffered such a high level of stress, led him to hallucinating. And I've heard many people say things like, whenever they were by themselves in the cell, they thought that the walls were moving, or that there were holes on the walls, or that their grandfather was talking to them. And their grandfathers had been dead for a long time. So it's people hallucinating, and some people believe that this is related to the use of drugs, but it's not so. So when you look at all these testimonies, you see that there are different styles, torturing styles. When a person says, well, I was put in a bathtub, I was in a leash, and you now tend to identify some very specific patterns. And when you go to a different police station, you see there's a different style, right? People are placed on a table, and they're beaten as they are naked on the table. Well, we have this universal difficulty ahead of us, but whenever we look at people in the eye, we realize that they are telling the truth. And when people realize that there is an institutional project, when people were looking at them in the eye and were interested in their circumstances, and this is relieving for them. Nevertheless, it would seem that torturers knew nothing about this. But whenever we had a sentence of torture ratified by the Supreme Court in Spain, and where the official version was saying by the torturers that the detainee had fallen on the bathtub. And then 4 days later, the same thing happened over and over again. But not even the judges could believe this. But that was the official version of things. They were lying. They were lying. It was clear. And of course, as forensic doctors, we were totally convinced that we were looking at lies. Well, and I will leave it here. Thank you very much. Well, thank you all for your presentations. Thanks for your questions, and also thanks for the answers. We are now coming to the end of this webinar, feeling that almost 40 years later, it's still necessary to shed some more light on the death of Esteban Muruetagoiena and about the use of torture. A reference been made to this. Let's remind you that there were dark and terrible circumstances that were the ones that supported all this, that made all this possible in the post-Franco area, where the Spanish security forces roamed at ease on many occasions in a blatantly intimidating and omnipotent way, because they were aware of their position of impunity and immunity. We're talking about a time of use of armed violence by ETA, the role of occupational forces by the national security forces, especially in that area of Oyarzun, Hernani, Renteria. The systematic use of torture to obtain information against the will of the detainees, and also the spread of terror, ultimately the violation of the most basic human rights. That was part of the daily life of Basque citizens. I believe it's important to look at the past, to understand what happened, to establish responsibilities and do justice and get justice, especially for the victims. But above all, I believe all this is important, not just to struggle with each other. I believe all this is important so that these circumstances never happen again, because we want to close these open wounds. We want them cleaned, we want them healed, because this will make us stronger as a community and as a country. But in order to achieve this, we need a story that accommodates all different stories, also the stories of victims of torture. I would like to thank our guests for their presence, for being with us today. Paco Etxebarría, Jonathan Martínez, thanks you for your professionalism. These are values that we need to take into consideration, of course. And I would like to add that we're very, very happy. We're very proud to have had Tamara, Esteban's daughter, with us. Thank you for your testimony, your memories, and above all for your generosity to contribute to a better future for all, without exception. You worked at the European Parliament some years ago, and as long as we're here, we will welcome you with our arms open. So a huge thanks to all three of you, and also to Clara Ponsatí, to her office, for the work you've done. Thanks to Liz Castro for translating Jonathan's chronicle into English. And also thanks to all of you who have followed this webinar. Thank you very much. See you soon. Bye. Take care.
Gràcies a tothom. Bona tarda. Adéu.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Bye.
Muchas gracias por vuestras intervenciones.
A ti, Clara, por habernos dado esta oportunidad.
Gracias, Clara. Gracias a Tamara. Ahora que...
Vale. Espero veros pronto y en persona. Muchos besos.
Seguro.
Hasta luego. Adéu.
Adéu.